As the Cold War developed in the late 1940s, the U.S. Army realized there was a need to offset the massive numerical superiority of the Soviet armored forces in Europe. The Army concluded it needed a highly mobile, battlefield-level delivery system for tactical nuclear and conventional weapons. Development of this system started in May of 1950, when the Office Chief of Ordnance, or OCO, headed by Major General Elbert Ford, assigned Redstone Arsenal responsibility for a preliminary design study of a special-purpose, large-caliber field artillery rocket. The following August, the Army Chief of Staff directed the Chief of Ordnance to proceed with a limited firing program to investigate the performance characteristics of a large-caliber, free-flight rocket capable of delivering an atomic warhead. Preliminary design work was begun with a clear understanding that the system was to make the maximum use of available, off-the-shelf hardware as a means of reducing costs and saving time. The Chief of Ordnance established the project with the Department of the Army Priority 1A. That October, the initial design studies were completed, and work on the fabrication of 5 feasibility demonstration models of the large-caliber field rocket were made. On October 26, the OCO contracted with Douglas Aircraft Company for preliminary laboratory studies on the new project. Before the actual test firing of the first rocket, there was considerable controversy in the Pentagon as to its worth. There was serious consideration in the General Staff of cancellation on the grounds that such a large, unguided rocket could not possibly have the accuracy to justify further expenditure of funds. That December, General Holger Toftoy, who was in charge of the program, was on a trip to the White Sands Proving Grounds when he ran into a Texan making statements that, shall we say, were hard to believe. When his veracity was questioned, the Texan exclaimed, "Why, around these parts I'm called Honest John." General Toftoy, knowing that soldiers love to give their hardware catchy names, later said, "I felt Honest John would be an appropriate nickname." Thus, this new system would be christened the Honest John, a moniker that would stick with it through several variations and nomenclature changes. Despite the Pentagon controversy, the very next month, January of 1951, the Undersecretary of the Army approved the formal contract award, which was issued as a supplemental agreement to the contract with Douglas Aircraft. The primary objective of the Phase 2 program was to provide definite proof of weapon systems feasibility through design, development, fabrication, and test of the actual components as an assembled unit. Flight testing began in June of 1951. The first of 5 feasibility demonstration flight tests were launched at White Sands Proving Grounds. This sampling was to demonstrate that a large but simple unguided rocket could deliver a 1,500-pound payload to a range of 20,000 yards with acceptable accuracy. The last demonstration ended that August and successfully established the technical feasibility of the basic Honest John as a highly accurate system. This was a considerable achievement given that the Ordnance Corps Douglas team had less than 9 months to design, develop, build, and assemble the initial test models. In addition, the first flight of the series was the most successful, and in January of 1953, the first limited production Honest John rockets, designated Artillery Rocket XM-31, reached U.S. Army units. In September of 1953, the Honest John was reclassed as the M-31, losing the X as it was no longer experimental. The first operational units were deployed in Europe in the spring of 1954. The original Honest John was an unguided 762mm artillery rocket, powered by an M6 solid-fuel rocket engine which made 99,000 pounds of thrust in a 4-second burn. It was stabilized in flight by 8 solid-propellant M7 spin motors, mounted near the base of the warhead, 90 degrees apart, firing perpendicular to the rocket's flight path. The spin rockets fired briefly after the rocket left the launch rail, but before main motor burnout, and imparted a 3.5 revolution per second roll on the rocket. This stabilized it in flight similar to the rifling the barrel of a gun and helped balance out any misalignment with the fins. There were initially 2 warhead options for the Honest John, the W-7 tactical fission nuclear bomb and a 1,500-pound conventional warhead. The W-7 was a variable yield bond with up to a 20-kiloton capability. In 1959, the W-31 nuclear warhead was made available with up to a 40-kiloton yield. Later, both chemical and cluster bomb anti-personnel warhead options were added. The original Honest John rocket had a 15.4-mile range and weighed 5,820 pounds. The Honest John was the United States' first nuclear rocket, and of all the 1950s nuclear rocket systems, it was the easiest to operate. The rocket could be transported from the depot to the launching unit by truck in 3 parts: warhead, motor, and fins. Or it could be assembled and placed on the M329 transport trailer and towed by truck. Assembling the rocket and mounting it on the M289 launcher was then accomplished by 6 men with a crane in about 5 minutes. The rocket could also be transported on the launcher truck fully assembled and nearly ready to fire. When the launcher truck was parked, the launch rail unfolded, the foot plates lowered, and the launcher leveled, it was then ready for aiming and firing. Minimum range was 5.5 kilometers or 3.4 miles, with a maximum range of 24.8 kilometers or 15.4 miles. Claims vary as to how long it took to set up and get the Honest John ready to fire. These are usually between 5 and 12 minutes, but once in position, the firing process still took about 10 minutes. Regardless, the Honest John was a quick rocket to set up and fire, making it an elusive target for counter-battery fire. Because of its simplicity, Army units actually preferred the Honest John to the guided missiles such as Corporal and Lacrosse. Since I'm mentioning the guided missiles, this may be a good time to make a quick point about this weapons category that can get a bit confusing. Technically, anything thrown or launched through the air at a target with the intent of doing damage is classified as a missile. A rock can be a missile if you throw it at something with the intent to do damage. But in military weapons parlance, a missile means a weapon that is propelled by its own onboard motor and is guided or can make course corrections in flight to its target. If it is launched by its own motor, but without guidance or in-flight correction, it's considered a rocket. This can cause confusion because in June of 1963, the Army changed the Honest John's designation to MGR-1. Now here I hit a little bit of a snag. The Department of Defense website said that MGR stood for Medium Ground Attack Rocket, but the Department of the Army website said it stood for Medium Guided Rocket, despite the Honest John being an unguided rocket. As we used to say when I was in the Army, there are 3 ways to do things: the right way, the wrong way, and the Army way. In 1959, there was an attempt to field a lightweight portable towed launcher for airborne units called the XM-33, later just M-33. The M-33 launcher was made to be air mobile and towed behind a much smaller 3/4 ton truck as opposed to the 5-ton trucks that field artillery units normally used. From what I can discern, the smaller vehicles meant the rocket could not be towed on its launcher, as even the lightweight launcher was too heavy for a 3/4 ton truck to tow with a nearly 3-ton rocket on it. To address this, a lightweight air-droppable transport trailer and handling unit called the M465 rocket transport cart was made. This lightweight unit had rollers, so the rocket could be rotated on the cart to aid with assembly and handling, but a crane was still needed to get it on the launcher. The M33 launcher unit failed, as it was judged simply not sturdy enough for the job. But the Army felt airborne units still needed some sort of rocket artillery, so they created the much smaller MGR-3 Little John rocket just for the airborne. The Honest John underwent a series of improvements in the late 1950s, which included a lighter, higher thrust engine, which raised the thrust from 99,000 pounds to 150,000 pounds of thrust. This made the rocket 15 inches shorter and 1,500 pounds lighter. The fins were reduced in size to improve accuracy. Now that may seem counterintuitive, but it helped reduce the rocket's tendency to weather vane into the wind. The spin rockets were reduced by half and flush mounted in recesses in the base of the warhead, thus eliminating the 4 fin-like protrusions near the base of the warhead. These improvements doubled the rocket's range to 30 miles for nuclear warhead delivery, and in 1961, these new rockets started being delivered under the designation M50, later redesignated MGR-1B, and later the MGR-1C. They stayed in frontline service until 1973, when they were sent to the National Guard, where they served until 1983. Others were sacrificed as targets, such as this one being hit by a Hawk missile. No less than 13 foreign countries used the Honest John, some of them until the 1990s. Over 7,000 were produced, making it one of the most prolific large Army rockets ever made. This was an amazing accomplishment for a rapidly designed system that was simple and low cost, at about $31,000 per rocket in 1960, or $325,000 per rocket in 2026 dollars, depending on the warhead. It was an unguided free-flight rocket that could carry multiple types of payloads and was used by 14 countries, including the United States, as rocket field artillery for nearly 30 years. Yet despite that long service life, it was never fired in combat. Many are still on display in museums, and some outside of high schools and even commercial establishments. It's become a favorite amongst model rocketry enthusiasts and kit model makers. It was the rocket you could trust. After all, it was Honest John.
Out by the motor yard, we heard that iron groan. Big old tube on a trailer bed, headed for the danger zone. It ain't no fancy hound, it don't need much coax. Point it, load it, send it out like a bottle of Rocket Joe. Well, the captain gave the wink, and the crew said alright. One pull on the lever, then it vanished in the night. Honest John, easy as a bottle rocket. Honest John, watch that long tube socket. Oh yeah, Honest John, launch it and you're gone. Could tote a plain old warhead or a package mean and cold. Same old rough and ready ride for the brave and the bold. No silver bells, no polished charm, just grit in a painted shell. If the boy said send it through, it would sure do its job well. Well, the captain gave the wink, and the crew said alright. One pull on the lever, then it vanished in the night. Honest John, easy as a bottle rocket. Honest John, watch that long tube socket. Oh yeah, Honest John, launch it and you're gone. Two lanes of dust and thunder, a grin and a prayer, built for the hard old days when nobody played fair. Honest John, easy as a bottle rocket. Honest John, watch that long tube socket. Oh yeah, Honest John, launch it and you're gone.
Did I leave my keys in that thing?